What if I told you that the most disturbing things you'll ever read aren't from horror novels or movie scripts? What if the real nightmares are typed out by ordinary people on Reddit at 3 in the morning, confessing things that sound too twisted to be true? But here's the thing that'll keep you up tonight. They are true. Every single word. Before we dive into the abyss, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash that like button. Because trust me, you're going to want to be part of this community when we uncover the darkest corners of human confession. And leave a comment telling me which story disturbed you the most. I read every single one. Let's begin. There's something about Reddit that makes people confess their darkest secrets. Maybe it's the anonymity. Maybe it's the distance. Maybe it's because when you're typing in the dark, alone in your room, it feels like you're confessing to the void itself. And the void? It listens. It always listens. I've spent years reading these confessions, thousands of them, and I can tell you without hesitation that what you're about to hear will fundamentally change how you see the people around you, your neighbors, your coworkers, your family members. Everyone has secrets, but some secrets are so dark, so twisted, so utterly disturbing that they should never see the light of day. Yet here we are. Let me start with something that seems innocent enough. It's a story from a user named Throwaway Confession 4447. The title was simple. I've been living in someone's house for 3 months and they don't know. Pause. Let that sink in for a moment. 3 months. Not 3 days. Not 3 weeks. 3 entire months. This person wrote that they were homeless after losing their job during the pandemic. No family, no friends willing to help. Nothing. They found an empty house in a suburban neighborhood. The owners had moved out but hadn't sold it yet. It was one of those situations where a property sits on the market forever because the price is too high. The back window was unlocked. They climbed in. Just to sleep for one night, they said. That's how it always starts, isn't it? Just one night. Just one exception. Just this once. But one night became 2. 2 became a week. A week became a month. They established a routine. They learned the neighbors' schedules. They knew when the realtor would show the property. They'd hide in the crawl space during showings, barely breathing while potential buyers walked above their head, completely unaware that someone was living beneath them. Living, breathing, watching. The most disturbing part? They started to feel like the house was theirs. They rearranged furniture. They brought in personal items. They even fixed a leaky faucet in the bathroom. They were taking care of the place, they wrote, making it better. They felt like they were doing the owners a favor. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being the owner of that house, coming back one day to find signs that someone had been living there? That someone had slept in your bed, used your shower, sat on your couch? The violation of it. The absolute horror of realizing that someone infiltrated the most private space imaginable. Here's where it gets darker. Because it always gets darker. They wrote that they started to fantasize about what would happen if a family moved in. Would they stay in the crawl space? Would they watch the family through the vents? Would they come out at night while everyone slept? The post ended abruptly. No update. No resolution. Just silence. That user never posted again, which means either they moved on or they're still there, still hiding, still watching, still waiting. And that suburban house? It could be anywhere. It could be in your neighborhood. It could be next door. It could be yours. Think about that tonight when you're lying in bed. Think about the spaces in your house you never check. The attic you haven't been in for years. The crawl space beneath your floors. The gap behind your water heater. What's hiding there? Who's hiding there? But that's just the beginning. That's the appetizer. The main course is far more disturbing, far more twisted, far more impossible to believe. Yet every word is allegedly true. Before we continue, if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Hit that bell icon too, because these stories, they get worse. They get so much worse. And you're going to want to be notified when I drop the next video in this series. Trust me, you'll want to know. You'll need to know. Let's talk about user Deep Web Diary 93. This person claimed to work as a content moderator for a major social media platform. Their job was to review reported content and decide whether it violated community guidelines. Images, videos, text posts, everything that gets flagged goes through moderators like them. Seems straightforward enough, right? Wrong. So very wrong. They wrote that after 6 months on the job, they started noticing patterns. Certain types of content would be uploaded at specific times, from specific regions, with specific markers embedded in the metadata, things that the average user would never notice, things that the platform's algorithms weren't designed to catch, things that only a human reviewer, watching carefully, could possibly identify. What kind of content? The post never said explicitly, but reading between the lines, understanding the implications, following the breadcrumbs they left, it was clear they'd stumbled onto something organized, something massive, something that operated in plain sight, hidden among billions of daily uploads, using codes and symbols that seemed innocuous to anyone who didn't know what to look for. They reported it to their supervisor. That was their first mistake. Their supervisor told them they were seeing patterns that weren't there, that they were burned out, that they needed to take a mental health day. So they went higher. They contacted someone in corporate security. That was their second mistake. The bigger mistake, the fatal mistake. 2 days after that meeting, their employment was terminated. Not laid off, not let go. Terminated. Immediately. With a severance package that included an NDA so restrictive that they couldn't even tell their spouse why they'd lost their job. The NDA wasn't just about trade secrets or confidential business information. It specifically prohibited them from discussing anything they'd seen while moderating content. Any violation would result in legal action, financial ruin, possibly criminal charges. They signed it. What choice did they have? But then they made a Reddit account. They posted their story. And here's the truly disturbing part. Within hours, the post was removed. Not by Reddit moderators. The account itself was deleted, completely scrubbed, as if it had never existed. Except people had seen it. People had read it. People had copied it, and it spread. It's still spreading. Right now, in archived forums and screenshot collections, that confession exists in fragments, pieces of a puzzle that suggests something deeply, fundamentally wrong with the infrastructure of our digital lives. Something that operates with impunity because it's too big to fight, too connected to expose, too dangerous to investigate. And the person who wrote it? They never posted again under any username. They never came forward. They never elaborated. They simply vanished from the internet entirely. Think about that. In an era where everyone has a digital footprint, where everyone leaves traces, where everyone can be found, they vanished. Completely. Totally. Absolutely. What does it take to make someone vanish like that? What did they see? What did they know? And who made them disappear? Pause. Breathe. I know this is heavy. I know it's disturbing. But we're not even halfway through yet. And it gets worse. So much worse. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the darkest corners of human confession, show your support. Like this video. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think is really going on with these stories. Are they true? Are they elaborate fiction? And does it even matter if the implications are this disturbing? Let's shift gears. Let's talk about family. Because nothing is more sacred than family, right? Nothing is more trusted, more intimate, more supposedly safe than the people who share your blood. User Family Secrets 2019 posted a confession that starts innocuously enough. They wrote that they were helping their elderly father move into a nursing home, cleaning out a house full of 50 years of accumulated belongings, packing boxes, sorting through memories, the usual heartbreaking process of watching a parent enter the final chapter of their life. In the attic, they found a locked trunk, heavy, old, covered in dust thick enough to write in. Their father had always been secretive about that trunk. As a child, they'd asked about it repeatedly. Their father would always say the same thing. Just old paperwork. Nothing important. Nothing you need to worry about. But now, with their father's mind beginning to slip, with dementia setting in, with the keys found in a drawer, they opened it. They had to know. They needed to know. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them. Polaroids mostly, old ones, from the 70s and 80s. And every single photograph was of a child. Different children, different locations, different scenarios, but always children, always alone, always looking directly at the camera with expressions that ranged from confusion to fear to something that looked almost like resignation. On the back of each photograph was a date, a location, a first name, nothing more. Just enough information to be specific, not enough to be identifying. They wrote that their hands were shaking as they looked through them, their mind racing, trying to rationalize, trying to explain, trying to find any innocent explanation for why their father, their kind, gentle, loving father, would have a trunk full of photographs of strange children. But there was no innocent explanation. There couldn't be. And then they found the journal, leather-bound, filled with handwritten entries in their father's distinctive script. The entries were dated. They corresponded with the photographs, and they detailed everything, every encounter, every moment, every horrifying, unspeakable act, written with the kind of clinical detail that suggested pride. That suggested someone who wanted to remember, who wanted to relive, who wanted to preserve these moments forever. The Post said they immediately called the police. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. The police came. They took the trunk. They took the journal. They took statements. And then, nothing. Weeks passed, months passed. They called for updates. They were told the case was being investigated. They were told to be patient. They were told they'd be contacted if any information could be shared. But nothing ever came of it. No arrests, no charges, no press releases, no closure. They wrote that they'd tried to research the names and dates from the photographs, but it was impossible. Too many variables, too much time, too little specific information. Some of the children in those photographs are middle-aged now, if they're alive, if they survived, if they remember. Do they know someone documented their nightmare? Do they know those images exist somewhere, in an evidence locker, filed away, forgotten? And their father? He's still in that nursing home, his dementia progressing, his memories fading, including, presumably, the memories of what he did, who he hurt, whose lives he destroyed. He'll die peacefully, probably, surrounded by nurses who think he's a sweet old man, never facing justice, never facing consequences, never even remembering what he did. The person who posted this confession wrote that they visit him every week. They sit beside his bed. They hold his hand. They tell him they love him. Because despite everything, despite the horror, despite the betrayal, he's still their father. And that's the most disturbing part of all. Not the crimes, not the photographs, not the journal, but the fact that love doesn't stop. That even knowing what he did, they still love him, still care for him, still can't abandon him. What does that say about human nature? What does that say about family? What does that say about the bonds that hold us together, even when they should shatter? Before we move on, I need you to do something. I need you to engage. Drop a comment right now telling me how this story made you feel. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button, because we're about to go even deeper, even darker, and you need to be prepared for what comes next. Trust me on this. Let's talk about user night shift, nurse 77. Healthcare workers see things. That's a given. They see humanity at its most vulnerable, its most desperate, its most raw. But this particular nurse saw something that they still can't explain, still can't rationalize, still can't forget. They worked the night shift at a large urban hospital, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The shift where the hospital goes quiet, where the lights dim, where the only sounds are beeping monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses making their rounds. They were assigned to the oncology ward. Cancer patients, many terminal, many in their final days or weeks. It's hard work, emotionally draining, but rewarding in its own way, providing comfort, providing dignity, providing peace. One patient, they wrote, stood out, an elderly man. No visitors, no family, no friends, just alone, dying alone. He'd been there for 3 weeks, lucid most of the time, pleasant, grateful for any attention. He'd tell stories about his life, his career as a teacher, his wife who'd passed years ago, his regrets, his hopes that death would be peaceful, standard end-of-life stuff, sad but not unusual. But then one night, he asked the nurse a question. He asked if they believed in confession, if they thought confessing sins before death mattered. The nurse, not particularly religious, said something non-committal, something about doing what felt right, something comforting and meaningless. And that's when he started talking. He confessed to murders, multiple murders, spanning decades. He described them in detail, the victims, the methods, the reasons, all of it. He spoke calmly, clearly, without emotion, as if he were describing a grocery list or a weather report, just stating facts. The nurse stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do, not knowing if this was real or delusion or medication-induced hallucination. When he finished, he asked if the nurse felt better now that he'd confessed, as if the nurse's absolution mattered, as if sharing the burden somehow made it lighter. The nurse reported it immediately. Their supervisor, hospital security, the police were called. Detectives came. They took a statement from the nurse. They spoke to the patient, and the patient denied everything, said he'd never said any such thing, said the nurse must have misunderstood, said the pain medication made him confused sometimes, but he'd never confessed to something he didn't do. The detectives investigated. They checked missing persons reports. They checked cold cases. They found nothing that matched the details the man had provided. No bodies, no evidence, no confirmation of any kind. They concluded that it was either a delusion or a fabrication. The man died 2 days later, peacefully, in his sleep, and the nurse was left with this burden, this knowledge, this impossible to verify confession. They wrote that they think about it constantly. Was he telling the truth? Did he really kill people? Were the bodies never found? Were the cases never reported? Or was it all fantasy? The delusion of a dying mind? The last desperate attempt at significance before the void? There's no way to know. There never will be. And that's what makes it so disturbing. The uncertainty, the possibility, the fact that a serial killer might have died peacefully in a hospital bed, surrounded by compassionate nurses who had no idea who he really was, what he'd really done, what secrets he took to the grave. We need to pause here. We need to take a breath, because what comes next is arguably the most disturbing confession I've ever read, the most impossible to believe, the most absolutely horrifying, and yet allegedly true. Every word. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you've liked this video. Make sure you're ready, because once I tell you this next story, you can't unhear it. You can't forget it. It'll be with you forever, just like it's been with me. Are you ready? Let's continue. User deleted confession 66 posted something that was removed within an hour. But I saw it. Others saw it, and we saved it. The confession was simple. 3 sentences. But those 3 sentences contained more horror than most novels. They wrote, "I killed my twin in the womb. I was conscious during it. I remember everything." Let that sink in. They claimed to remember being in the womb, remember their twin, remember the moment they realized there wasn't enough room for both of them, enough nutrients for both of them, enough oxygen for both of them, and remember making a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice to survive at their twin's expense. They described it in their post, how they felt their twin growing weaker, how they could sense the twin's distress, how they continued to take more than their share until their twin stopped moving, stopped growing, was absorbed back into the mother's body as if they'd never existed. Vanishing twin syndrome, it's called. It happens. It's documented. But no one claims to remember it. No one claims it was intentional. No one claims consciousness in the womb, except this person. They wrote that they'd never told anyone. How could they? Who would believe them? What therapist would take that seriously? What priest would know how to respond? So they carried it alone. For their entire life, the knowledge that they were a killer, that their first act of life was murder, that their existence came at the cost of their siblings' non-existence. And the worst part? They didn't feel guilty. They felt nothing. No remorse, no sadness, no regret, just acknowledgement, just fact, just the simple truth that they survived and their twin didn't, and that was always how it was going to be. The post was removed. The account was deleted. But the confession remains in screenshots and archives. A bizarre, impossible, utterly disturbing claim that can never be proven or disproven. It exists in that liminal space between medical impossibility and philosophical nightmare. And somewhere, that person is living their life, walking among us, knowing what they know, carrying what they carry, looking exactly like everyone else. I want you to pause the video right now. I want you to like it. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment telling me what you think about that confession, because we're not done. We have more to cover. More confessions, more darkness, more truth that sounds like fiction but isn't. We're past the halfway point now, and if you thought it couldn't get worse, you're wrong. So very wrong. Let's continue. User Accountant by Day wrote about their job. They work for a firm that handles estate planning, wills, trusts, asset management, the kind of work that involves knowing intimate details about wealthy people's lives. Who gets what when they die, how much they have, where they keep it. Standard stuff. Boring, mostly, until they started noticing a pattern. Certain clients, always elderly, always wealthy, always without close family, would make unusual changes to their wills shortly before dying. They'd add beneficiaries, people with no apparent connection to them, no shared history, no relationship, just names. And those names would inherit substantial amounts, sometimes millions. The accountant didn't think much of it at first. People make strange choices near the end. Maybe these were old friends, maybe distant relatives, maybe charitable causes. But then they noticed something else. The same names kept appearing. Different clients, different cities, different circumstances, but the same beneficiaries, over and over, always inheriting, never refusing, never questioned. They started investigating quietly, looking up these names, cross-referencing them, and what they found was disturbing. These beneficiaries were nurses, caregivers, home health aides, people who had access to these elderly clients in their final days or weeks, people who were there when the wills were changed, people who presumably helped with the paperwork, witnessed the signatures, made sure everything was legal and proper. The accountant wrote that they suspect an organized scheme, a network of caregivers who identify wealthy, isolated clients, who befriend them, who suggest changes to their estate plans, who inherit fortunes, and then move on to the next victim. It's not technically illegal. Everything is done properly. The clients sign the documents willingly. No coercion can be proven. No fraud can be established. It's just influence, just suggestion, just being there at the right time with the right words. The accountant reported their suspicions to authorities. Nothing came of it. No laws were broken. No investigation was warranted. The will changes were legitimate. The inheritances were legal. And the pattern? Just coincidence. Just the normal chaos of estate planning. Nothing to worry about. But the accountant knows better. They see it constantly now. They see these names appearing in file after file. They see the same caregivers listed as beneficiaries in case after case. They see fortunes being redirected, families being disinherited, wealth being harvested, and there's nothing they can do about it. Nothing anyone can do about it. Because it's technically legal, technically ethical, technically just people making choices about their own money. The accountant ended their post with a warning. If you have elderly relatives, if they're wealthy, if they're isolated, watch who has access to them. Watch who they trust. Watch who suggests changes to their estate plans. Because somewhere, right now, A network of predators is identifying the next victim, the next fortune, the next inheritance that will be redirected into their pockets. And no one can stop them. We're in the final stretch now. The darkest territory. The most disturbing confessions. The ones that make you question everything you think you know about the people around you. If you've made it this far, you're committed. You're part of this community. So subscribe if you haven't. Like this video. Comment below. Tell me which confession has disturbed you most. Tell me if you think these are real. Tell me anything. Just engage. Because these final stories, they're going to stay with you forever. User Former Teacher 2021 wrote about their career in education. 25 years teaching high school English. A good teacher, by all accounts. Students liked them. Parents trusted them. Administration valued them. Standard career, standard life, until they retired. And then, in retirement, with time to reflect, they wrote a confession that changes everything. They wrote that over their 25 years of teaching, they identified 37 students who they believed were psychopaths. Not troubled, not difficult, not acting out. Actual psychopaths. Students who displayed the classic markers: lack of empathy, superficial charm, manipulation, calculated cruelty disguised as accidents or jokes. They described how they'd watch these students, how they'd see them operate, how they'd watch them experiment with social boundaries, testing how much they could get away with, learning what behaviors got rewards and what behaviors got punished, adapting, evolving, becoming better at mimicking normal human emotion. And here's the disturbing part. The teacher never reported any of them, never flagged them for counseling, never told parents or administration. Why? Because there was nothing to report. These students weren't breaking rules. They weren't hurting anyone in ways that could be proven. They were just different, just off, just fundamentally wrong in ways that only someone paying very close attention could notice. The teacher wrote that they've kept track of these students through social media, through news reports, through mutual connections, and the results are exactly what you'd expect. Some became successful business executives. Some went into politics. Some became lawyers or doctors or teachers themselves. Some, presumably, became criminals, but were never caught. And some just disappeared into normal life, indistinguishable from everyone else. The teacher's point was simple and horrifying. Psychopaths are everywhere. They're not rare. They're not anomalies. They're common. They're in every school, every workplace, every community. They're your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends, maybe even your family. And most of them function just fine in society. Most of them never commit crimes. Most of them just lack something fundamental that makes them human. And no one notices. No one cares. No one does anything about it. Because what would you do? How do you treat someone for being fundamentally different? How do you fix someone who isn't broken in any way society recognizes? The teacher ended their post with a list. 37 names. They wrote that these were the students they'd identified. They're putting the names out there, they wrote, so that someone, somewhere, might see them and understand, might recognize the pattern, might be warned. The post was removed immediately. Doxing, even of adults, even with explanation, violates Reddit's terms of service. The account was banned. But the confession exists in screenshots. And those 37 names are out there, circulating, being researched, being investigated by amateur internet detectives who want to know if the teacher was right, if those students really were psychopaths, if they really did grow up to be exactly what the teacher predicted. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. What if the teacher was right? What if those 37 people really are fundamentally different? What if they're living among us, functioning normally, contributing to society, but lacking something essential? And if the teacher could identify 37 in one small high school over 25 years, how many are there total? How many psychopaths are walking among us right now? How many people do we interact with daily who are fundamentally, irreparably different in ways we can't detect? Thousands, millions, more. Final story, final confession, final nightmare before we end this journey into darkness. User therapist Burden 44 wrote about their career as a licensed therapist, 15 years in practice, hundreds of clients, all the usual stuff. Depression, anxiety, relationship issues, trauma, the normal spectrum of human suffering. But one client stood out, a middle-aged man, successful, married, kids, stable. He came to therapy for what he described as mild anxiety, work stress, normal stuff. But during their sessions, over months, he slowly revealed something else. Something he'd never told anyone. Something he carried his entire life. He confessed to the therapist that he'd killed someone when he was 17. Not in self-defense. Not accidentally. Deliberately. Intentionally. He'd planned it, executed it, and gotten away with it. The victim was another teenager. Someone who'd bullied him. Someone who'd made his life hell for years. Someone who, the client felt, deserved to die. He described it in detail. How he'd planned it. How he'd waited for the right moment. How he'd made it look like an accident. How he'd maintained his composure when questioned by police. How he'd attended the funeral and comforted the victim's parents. How he'd never been suspected, never been caught, never faced consequences. The therapist wrote that they sat there, listening, bound by confidentiality laws, unable to report it, unable to do anything, because the crime was old, because there was no ongoing danger, because therapist-client privilege is nearly absolute. They couldn't tell the police, couldn't tell the victim's family, couldn't tell anyone. They could only listen. And after the confession, after unburdening himself, the client felt better. His anxiety diminished. His mood improved. He said he felt lighter, said that telling someone, even bound by confidentiality, made all the difference. He thanked the therapist. He said they'd helped him more than they could know. And then he stopped coming to therapy. Treatment complete. Problem solved. The therapist wrote that they think about it constantly. About the victim's family who never got justice. About the killer walking free. About the murder that will never be solved because the only people who know the truth are bound by law to keep it secret. They wrote that they can't even tell this story in a way that might lead to identification. They changed details, changed timeline, changed circumstances. Because even now, even trying to share this burden, they're bound by their oath, bound by the law, bound by ethics that say some secrets must stay secret no matter how much they weigh on the soul. And that's where we end. In that impossible space between knowing and being able to act. between truth and justice, between confession and consequence. These stories, all of them, exist in that space, told anonymously, unable to be verified, unable to be investigated. Just words on a screen that may or may not be true, that may or may not matter, that may or may not change anything, but they're out there. These confessions, these truths, these nightmares, told to the void by people who needed to tell someone, anyone, even if that someone is just usernames scrolling past on a screen at 3 in the morning, even if no one believes them, even if nothing ever comes of it. The confessions exist, and now you've heard them. Now you carry them too. Now you're part of this dark community that knows what people are capable of, what secrets people carry, what truths hide behind normal faces living normal lives. Welcome to the nightmare. Welcome to reality. Welcome to the darkest corners of human confession. Before you go, before you click away, before you try to forget what you've heard, do me one final favor. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave a comment telling me what you thought. Tell me which story disturbed you most. Tell me if you believe these confessions are true. Tell me anything. Just engage. Because this content, this journey into darkness, it continues. There are more confessions, more secrets, more nightmares waiting to be explored. And I'll be here, reading them, researching them, sharing them with you every week, every video, every deep dive into the places most people are afraid to look. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being brave enough to peer into the abyss with me. And remember, the abyss peers back. It always peers back. Sweet dreams, if you can still have them after this. I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe out there and trust no one, because everyone has secrets. Everyone has confessions. Everyone has darkness hiding behind their eyes. You just have to know how to look, how to listen, how to recognize the signs. And now you know. Now you've been warned. Now you can never unsee what you've seen, what you've heard, what you've learned. The world is darker than you thought. People are stranger than you imagined. And truth? Truth is always more disturbing than fiction. Always, without exception. Forever and always. That's the real horror. That's the real nightmare. That's the truth that keeps me up at night and will keep you up too. Welcome to the community. Welcome to the darkness. Welcome to the truth. Now hit that subscribe button one more time, for good measure, because you're going to want to be here for what comes next. I promise you that. I guarantee it. The rabbit hole goes deeper, so much deeper, and we're only just beginning to scratch the surface. See you soon, very soon, sooner than you think, sooner than you're ready for. But you'll watch anyway. You can't help it now. You're hooked. You need to know. You need to see. You need to understand. And I'll be here, waiting, always waiting, with more confessions, more darkness, more truth. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay aware, and whatever you do, don't trust the faces around you, because you never know who's carrying what secrets, who's hiding what truths, who's living what lies. Everyone is a mystery. Everyone is a potential nightmare. Everyone is a confession waiting to happen. Remember that. Always remember that. The end is just the beginning. And the beginning is just the surface. And the surface is just a lie. Welcome to reality. Welcome to the truth. Welcome to the nightmare that never ends. Goodbye for now, but only for now. Never for long. Never forever. Just for now. Until the next confession. Until the next secret. Until the next truth that sounds like fiction, but isn't. That's the promise. That's the guarantee. That's what keeps you coming back. The need to know. The need to understand. The need to peer into darkness and see what peers back. And it always peers back. Trust me on that. It always peers back. One final reminder: subscribe, like, comment, engage with this community, be part of this journey, because we're in this together. All of us, united by curiosity, united by horror, united by the need to know what lurks in the darkest corners of human experience. Thank you, truly, for watching, for listening, for being here. See you next time, in the darkness, where we belong, where we always return, where the truth lives, waiting, forever waiting, for those brave enough to look. And you looked, you listened, you learned. Now you can never unlearn. And that's exactly as it should be. That's exactly what you wanted. That's exactly what you needed. Truth, raw, unfiltered, disturbing. Welcome home.